Oh man, I've missed this. When I was a kid, purchasing a new game was like playing Russian roulette. There was no internet, there was very few magazines, and there were certainly no demos. More often than not, you only had a few options in terms of making your video game selection. Number one was the box art. Specifically, I mean the screenshots on the back. But more often than not, those didn't give you a whole lot of information, and sometimes they led you astray. Number two was the Guinea Pig Friend. We all had one of those, the guy that snatched up every game as soon as it came out. Truthfully, this was probably the best scenario because you could just go over to your buddy's house and play the game with him. Or even better, he might even let you borrow it for a while and let you test it out. Number three, rentals. This is basically the exact same thing as the Guinea Pig Friend, but it actually costs you money, which frankly I didn't have very much of most of the time. Number four, advertisements. This includes commercials, but I'm specifically talking about printed ads. I spent a significant portion of my youth reading comic books. During that time, I was bombarded by images of games I wanted. Every so often, I'd get a chance to play one of them. When I came across this ad in one of my issues of Iron Man, I knew I had to play it. As an avid lover of Castlevania and Kung Fu movies, this game seemed to have my name written all over it. So while staying over at a friend's house for a birthday party, I convinced the birthday boy to rent Phantom Fighter. Once everyone was asleep, I stayed up until the sun came up playing the game. Now, I was unaware, just like I imagine many others were, that Phantom Fighter was actually based on a movie. Mr. Vampire is a Hong Kong produced film that blends kung fu, comedy, and B-horror elements into a delightful soup that spawned 4 sequels. And as a matter of personal opinion, if you haven't seen any of the films, you should go watch at least the first one. Especially the first one. Phantom Fighter pretty much adheres to the general universe that was built upon the Mr. Vampire films. You play as Kenshi, a Qianshi fighter. You're also pretty much China's only hope to save 7 towns that have been invaded by Qianshi. What the heck is Qianshi, you may ask? Well, Qianshi are hopping vampires. That's right, hopping vampires. So basically, Kenshi travels from town to town, learning new moves and beating the snot out of vampires. In each town, you'll collect 3 orbs and defeat a final boss. Once you've done that, you move on to the next town. As you proceed through the game, you're going to encounter several different types of Qianshi. I won't bore you with going through every different type, but I will say that some are much more difficult than others. Especially the tiny one. Little f***. I'm going to be entirely honest here. This game is not easy. But if you go into the game with a strategy, you'll probably do just fine. First, make sure you find the temple in each town first. That way, whenever you're close to death, you can always go back and recharge your health. Secondly, you need to constantly be learning new moves from the studio. So once you've got some scrolls, find the studio and stock up on the powerful moves. Now the studio is a little tricky. When you walk into the studio, you're going to encounter a guard of some type. Answer whatever question he asks, and these are usually pretty easy questions. Get past the guard, pay the master the scrolls, and pick your new skills. Here are the skills that I recommend. 1. The 4 thrust. Now, you got to build your way up to this one, but it's totally worth it. Now 2, always try to beef up your move ability. If you can get it all the way up to the dragon move, you'll be super fast and you won't regret that either. 3, there are a couple of good kick moves, but I recommend the side kick. It gives you the most oomph to your kick. So now that I've offered some somewhat feeble strategic advice, let's talk nuts and bolts. First, the graphics. The character sprites look nice overall, but I find the coloring of said sprites to be a bit boring. They all sport a pretty monochromatic vibe. Shades of yellow, shades of green, shades of gray. You get the idea. Boring. Now the backgrounds are a little different. They sport some pretty nice textures and a lot more color variation. Now I feel like I should mention that I'm talking about the inside of the buildings in the town. When you're outside in what is essentially an overworld, you're pretty much back to tasting a mouthful of bland. What about the audio? Well, overall I dig the audio. The sound is pretty much what you'd expect from a game of this type. As for the music, well, the music is catchy, but it's pretty repetitive. You pretty much hear a loop of the same song for the entire game. Now, you'll get a change of tune from time to time, but not often. The gameplay is pretty basic. You move through levels, you punch or kick the mustard out of Qianshi as you go. Truthfully, the method reminds me of Kung Fu. Now, it's obviously a different game, but I think fundamentally it's pretty much the same, right? So you couple a familiar gameplay style with difficulty that keeps you engaged, well, you got yourself a pretty decent game. Now, I'll readily admit that this game is no masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination, but I do believe it's good enough that it deserves a chance. So I urge you, go out, find a copy, play it, enjoy it, and after that, go check out the Mr. Vampire films because you will not be disappointed. They're a lot of fun, and very silly, I might add. Anyway, that's it for this edition of Weekend Game Guy After Dark. Remember to rate, comment, subscribe. As always, thanks for watching.